IronOverload.io hardcore episode 82 coming your way. We're right on our way to hitting 100 on this one. Today's going to be a very important episode. We're going to talk about TB500, which is a peptide. We're going to talk about it with Ostarine, which is a SARM for recovery. We're also going to talk about some logs on IronOverload where people have been running these compounds for recovery themselves. Let's first talk about TB500. So TB500, it's sold as a peptide. And I'm also seeing gels now being sold for TB500 where they're mixing the gel with BPC157 and they're running them together.
And pills as well, man. But
Yep.
just to jump in very quickly, sorry, before we go into the rest of the podcast. Uh, Oral versus injectable versus gel. I think injectable requires the least dosing. The second highest dosing would be the oral, and the biggest dosing, just for an effective dose getting into the body, would be the gel. But back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and most of you are going to be using the peptide and injecting. So you're going to get the peptide in the mail. It's going to come in a powder form. And of course, you have to do something called reconstituting because if they send the peptide already in liquid form, of course, the potency is going to drop substantially in the mail. By the time it gets to you, it may be completely worthless. So, of course, it's going to get to you in the powder form, and you at home have to reconstitute it and store it properly in the fridge and keep it away from sunlight and heat. And it's a great, not just for healing. A lot of people think, oh, I can only just use it for joints and healing. It's also great for recovery. I'm telling you, on TB500, some of these workouts that I've done, I definitely can tell the difference when it comes to recovery. And it's not the same thing as using anabolic steroids. Because anabolic steroids recovery is different. I'm talking about with TB500, when you do a workout, let's say you go run a half marathon, okay? Which every one of you listening to this should do at some point in your life because it's a great experience and the endorphins that you get after running a half marathon is like nothing else. And every one of you on here should be able to pull off a half marathon. I mean, we evolved as humans at running. That was one of our tools, running away from predators and running toward food, running and chasing down food. So we can definitely do it. So all of you set a goal one day to do a half marathon. But let's say you do a half marathon or a triathlon or anything like that. I wish I had TB500 back when I was doing triathlons because their recovery is insane. And those of you who weight train, you go into the gym, balls to the wall, leg day. How many of you complain after leg day? Oh, I'm sore 2 3 days. I have DOMS, which is delayed onset soreness, muscle soreness. And it sucks because then it interferes with your next workout and it's hard for you to get out of bed. It's hard for you to walk. It's hard for you that you can get in the tub. I've had that, and TB500, wow, does it help with recovery? Like your soreness goes away so much faster. And that's the war of training. You want to be able to hit the workout hard, then come out of it, and then be able to recover quicker so that you have the ability to hit your next workout. So TB500 is an amazing compound. And then I'll talk a little bit about Ostarine before I bring you in Mobster. Ostarine is a SARM, selective androgen receptor modulator. And Ostarine has been around for about 15 years now in the bodybuilding arena. And a lot of people like to use it for its lean muscle gain effects, its low side effects. But the big thing that a lot of people are noticing with Ostarine is the recovery aspect. And again, just like with TB500, you'll get in, you'll have a nice workout, you'll be able to recover quicker. And the challenge when you're having these workouts is being ready for the next one. Why is it in the NFL, when you're the first seed, you get a bye week going into the playoffs? Because that extra week gives you an advantage over your opponent. You've earned that advantage by getting the number one seed, being the best team in the conference. So you get that advantage of having an extra week off while the other team had to play a game. So they had to play a game on Sunday. You had 2 weeks rest, and then the game was on Saturday. So they only have 6 days to rest while you had 14 days to rest. That's an advantage. You had an extra 7, 8 days to rest. That's a huge advantage to you. So using TB500 with Ostarine for recovery is a huge advantage. Mobster?
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, here's the thing, guys, and I've said this on other shows. When we refer to high end athletes of all persuasions, Steve, and I'm seeing this more and more and more in even high end amateur, never mind professional levels, where if we are paying as ticket holders higher ticket prices, Steve, that's going towards the salary of these athletes. So, as an example, here in South Wales, rugby players, including professional rugby players or professional soccer players for that matter, the wages used to be rubbish, barely 2 or 3 times the average man's salary. This is back in the 70s. Now, a high end rugby player playing for the national team as well as a professional team can easily earn 125,000 pounds. So 125,000 pounds is approximately $150,000. Now, this doesn't compare perhaps with NFL, but nevertheless, what do I see? And I've been to a very high end professional game. And as we say back in the day, you came off, you had a shower, you got in a coach, you went home. What happens now is they are passing recovery drinks to them. They are addressing issues with injuries before they leave the stadium, and then they're getting into the whole therapy and recovery. This enables you to bring your athlete back for the next game, and the next game it keeps them at peak performance. So, for what do we learn as listeners to this show is that we never really focused off back in the day again, Steve, beyond perhaps a protein drink after training. We never really used to focus on the recovery aspects as much as we should. And what we learn from these high-end athletes is that it's super, super important. Less injuries, quicker time back to the gym. I mean, just for our younger listeners and people that are new to training, it means arguably, Steve, that you can grow muscle faster because you're recovering quicker. And this isn't just amino acids or protein powders. It's everything. It's sports massage, it's hot yoga, a big favorite of Steve's, but it's using products like TB500 as much for injury prevention and helping when you've got injuries as it is combining it with Ostarine, MK2866, as a, again, way to help recover from injuries, to deal with the minor tweaks and sprains that we get, and to recover from workouts. Let me give you one more thing, and Steve touched on this a little bit earlier on. It's quite simple. I've talked about, and I'll refer to myself again, doesn't know if maybe sound egotistical, but there you are. Who do I know as an athlete more than anybody else? Myself. And I have, at times, pushed the goddamn envelope, as I think Steve has and other listeners to this show will have done, in terms of the load that we put ourselves under, Steve, the sheer strain, the reps, the volume, and just the sheer goddamn weight, especially in my case, on certain particular exercises and certain times for competition, and even now just for my goddamn self in the gym. And the reality of that situation is the likelihood of soft tissue injuries, the likelihood, and I've been very touched with so far, Steve, never had this happen. I've never had any major muscle tears. I've never had any issues with connective tissue in terms of tendons snapping and needing to be reattached to the bone and so on and so forth. And that, for the listener, if you push yourself super hard in the gym, you are arguably, Steve, your risk factor goes up. And so anything that helps you recover from those workouts, that prevents these injuries, that enables your tendons, your soft tissue, your connective tissue, whatever, your fascia, and the muscle to recover in terms of just recovery, is what we need and what we need to be thinking about. Obviously, in terms of muscle thickening, muscle enlargement, muscle growth, tone, the speed of the muscle in certain athletic endeavors and so on and so forth is the reason why you're in the gym. But just being able to recover from those intense workouts, from pushing the envelope, from, if you are that much of a high-end athlete, taking things to the nth degree. And let me just finish on the one what I've told you before, Steve. I said, when I done world records, when I do something that puts me in the 1% of the 1%, the likelihood for myself or any other athlete trying to do something that perhaps no one else has done or very few people have done makes the risk factor incredibly high. So even though I haven't actually used TB500, Steve, I have had it here, and I've definitely looked at recovery as being far more important to me now. A, because of my age and still pushing heavy, crazy shit. But was I still competing, I would 100% be looking for any edge that gives me something in terms of my recovery, my ability to push back and push hard in the gym, and especially in regards to my competition. But think of it, like I said already, guys, if you recover quicker, then you're giving your body a chance to grow quicker because you've got better quicker. And we talk about inflammation, Steve, in terms of training, part of the response that your body gives to you. You inflame your muscles, you inflame your joints, you inflame the connective tissue when you work out. And it's your body's response to that that enables your muscles to get thicker and grow. It's part of the whole muscle building process, which is what most of our listeners want. But again, it's that combination of recovery and or risk factor for injury that you will see far more. I think now, Steve, just on the logs, we see far more recovery logs than we've ever done
Yeah.
before. And it's right across the spectrum in terms of ages. I will say it's focused on the older athletes, but we see far more recovery logs than we just see muscle building, muscle toning, getting in shape logs.
So we're going to talk about the logs in a second, but let me go over some more of the science and we're going to talk about dosing. So TB500, look, when you get the TB500, you order it, you come on our forum, you find a source that sells TB500. We have several. It's a synthetic version of protein fragment that's in our body. It's called thymosin beta 4. And we've seen the studies. There's been animal studies where it helps tissue regeneration. That's definitely huge when it comes to muscle building and recovery. Inflammation coming down. That's the opposite of the effect you get from anabolic steroids. Remember how at the beginning I told you how anabolic steroids help you recover, but they also do the opposite in some way because they are anabolic, they're inflammatory in the body. So they actually do both. They actually do both. They actually kind of it's kind of it kind of works against each other because anabolic steroids will help recovery, but it'll also slow recovery. And that's a little weird when I say it.
The best way to put it, Steve, I think, is what we call as a forced response, a
Yeah.
forced recovery. You're doing something above and beyond what the body would do on its own, and you're
Well, that
forcing
too.
that. So yeah,
Yeah, that too, because another factor too, when you're using anabolic steroids, is it increases mass and strength so rapidly that your body can't keep up with it. But that's secondary to that as well. So a lot of times you'll see people hop on anabolic steroids who don't have a lot of conditioning, or they'll rapidly increase their strength and they'll get injured. But when you're using TB500 or Ostarine, that's not going to be the case. They're not going to cause a rapid increase in strength, which causes injuries, and they're not inflammatory in the body the way anabolic steroids are. So another thing that TB500 does as well is wound healing, and I noticed that when I used it, I had a cut. I think I did some gardening or something. I had some cuts on my arms and my hand. Maybe my cat scratched me, or maybe from fishing. Some of these toothy critters that I catch, they'll take some wax at my fingers when I'm taking the hook off. And I noticed that I have a cut, really bad cut, and then the next day it'd be done, it'd be healed. So it does really work well. You see a lot. I think I get a lot of questions from guys who do CrossFit and boot camp training and stuff like that because that's really high volume, intense training, and their biggest challenge is recovery because they're thinking in my mind, it's not the workout that's hard, it's the recovery that's hard. When can I get back in there and kill it? Because if I get back in there too soon, I'm going to be weak. And my body, because my body isn't going to be recovered, I'm not going to be able to run as fast. So we see a lot of questions from people who do a lot of boot camp training because they really know their bodies well and their challenges. And that's the challenge I had when I was training for half marathons and I was training for 5Ks and I was training for triathlons was the recovery aspect. So let's talk about dosing. So TB500, when you're using the peptide form, which is the most commonly used form, and it's the form I recommend, as Mobster said, it's the most effective way to use it.
I
It's gonna
believe so.
come,
Yeah,
it's gonna come in a vial. 5 milligram or 10 milligram typically. Okay. I haven't seen too many other variations, mostly 5 and 10 milligram. Anyway, what you're going to do is you're going to reconstitute it, obviously. And after you reconstitute it, you're going to draw the amount you want. So the way TB500 works is I recommend you front load it. So you're going to have a front load amount and then you're going to have drop it down to a maintenance dose. So the first couple weeks, you want to run it 10, 15, 20 milligrams total. And of course, you want to split the dosing up. So do you want to, you can split the dosing as you want. Simplest way to do it would be like 3 or 4 times a week, but some people will do it every day. It doesn't matter. You want the peptide in your system. You want to get it into your system. Okay. So you front load it, and then after a couple weeks, you can cut the dose in half. So if you're going at 10, 15 milligrams, you can cut it down to 5 to 7.5 milligrams, and so on. And then eventually, third month, fourth month, you want to have it at a maintenance dose where maybe you're doing 2 to 5 milligrams a week total. And then you just keep a maintenance dose and you run it at your leisure from there. Remember, it's not a hormone. So there's no rule when it comes to using it, but you definitely want to give it at least a good 2, 3 months where you're giving it a shot to do the magic in the body. Now, Ostarine is a SARM and it does have hormonal effects in the body, very minor amount of suppression. So with Ostarine, you want to run it consistently. So you want to run it daily, consistently in like an 8 to 12 week span, and then you want to come off, okay, and take a break from it because it does affect you hormonally a little bit. Not like anabolic steroids will, but there is some effects. So what you want to do with it, a dosing. Back in the day, guys were using it usually 25 milligrams. Now people are using it higher. Some people go up to 50 milligrams. So a dose from 12.5 milligrams to 50 milligrams a day is perfectly fine with it. And then you want to go ahead and stack it along with the TB500. So the Ostarine is going to come. It's not an injectable. It's going to come in some of them have the gels, some of them have the pills, the capsules or whatever. You can come on the forum and check out the sources we have. They have several forms of them, but it's really good because there's also liquid form as well, and there's different ways to take it. I personally like the capsules. The liquids kind of taste really nasty to me. They kind of like burn my mouth. I just don't like the way they taste. It's like, ugh, it tastes horrible. So if you're, you don't want to deal with that, whatever, you can just take the capsule. So I have the capsules myself that I take, so it makes it really easy. And that's it. I mean, that's pretty much the way you're gonna dose them. It's really, really simple. Mobster, you want to touch on that and we get into the logs?
Yeah, one of the just on the taste, I used to give people shit on the forums and so pinch your nose, get it down the back of your neck, guys. But it is I believe it's a very, very high uh, alcohol content, medicinal alcohol. I can't remember which particular one it is as we do this show. ISO something or other, Steve. And to be fair, it's like 90 something proof, although you're only having a few milligrams, guys. It's not going to cause you, but it is especially nasty. So one of the tricks, if you do have the liquid form, is just have a shot of orange juice there, just to get that taste out of your mouth. I think the thing that is worth emphasizing here, Steve, is that both these products can be used specifically as injury recovery. But what we're talking about here specifically today with this show, because we have covered TB500 using the BPC 157 when we've been talking about injury recovery. What we're talking about here today, guys, is recovering from the very minor strains, tweaks, etc., soft tissue stuff that you get from pushing your rope in the gym, and specifically recovering from hard workouts. So, yes, Steve, back to you.
Well, I'm gonna send it over to you, buddy. So we got some IronOverload logs. Why don't you touch on them? But let me first say this about logs and how logs are important. You can come on
Yes, yes,
IronOverload
yes, yes.
and start your own log, and I'll have you talk about this as well. So
Yep.
logging is really. I have a log. Mobster has a log. I think my log has 10,000 views. How many of these does yours have, Mobster? Yours has a lot, right? Like 50,000 views.
I think it's something stupid, Steve. My longest, biggest one is up at 125,
Yeah.
150,000, something ridiculous.
And
Yeah.
he's got different logs on different
At
forums,
different
and he's
periods.
got more than one
Yeah.
log. So I have
Yeah.
several logs as well, but my recent log has 10,000 views. and it's not even that old. I just started logging it like 3 months ago. So we've got a lot of views on our logs, and logs are really good because it allows you some accountability, and it allows you basically you don't want to let the community down, you don't want to let yourself down. So it gives you a purpose, and it helps you track what you're doing. It's just like a farmer. You've heard of the Farmer's Almanac. And the Farmer's Almanac was a way for farmers to really find out patterns to the weather, when they should harvest their crops, when they should put the crops down, when they should fertilize, when they should do this, when they should do that, if they should water, blah, blah, blah. It's very, very important. And they develop, improvements to farming where they're able to grow crops in a cheaper fashion just by learning what's worked and what hasn't worked through trial and error. And the same thing with their if they're, raising cattle or anything. And that's why it's important to do a log so you can see through trial and error what's worked and what hasn't. And it's right there for you to go back and check. And you learn so much about yourself by doing this. Instead of just going to the gym and just working out and then going home and not even keeping track of the workouts you did and not keeping track of what you're eating and not keeping track of anything. And how are you going to get better? How are you going to figure out what worked, what didn't? What you're using, if you're using TB500 with Ostarine, that's a great log. You can come on IronOverload and start that log, and you can track how much you've improved. Maybe your knee got better, but your elbow didn't get better. And then you can adjust things from there. Maybe it's because I'm doing an extra couple sets of pull-ups, and that's putting a lot of pressure on my elbow. So maybe I need to back off of that. This way, the TB500 and the Ostarine can help with that recovery. Because if you keep pounding your body away, it doesn't matter what you run, it's not going to help you. You're just going to keep causing more and more injury. So it's important to do these logs so you learn about yourself. And also it's a great way for you to spread knowledge and help other people. Look, Mobster and I were going to be
Yeah,
dead.
that's what I
Yeah.
was going to say, Steve. Imagine this.
Yeah.
Imagine you guys decide to build something silly. You've learned carpentry and you decide to build a wardrobe, but you've never made one before. So you start your journey of getting the wood together and getting all these bits and pieces, etc., etc. But as you go along, you're not sure where to cut, you're not sure what varnish to use, and so on and so forth. So you create this process. To begin with, well, it's amazing, going to make a wardrobe. But then you get someone who says, "Oh, I did this with a door handle. This is how I fitted the hinges." And the next thing you know, it's almost a collective effort. Now, at the end, hopefully, you end up with this magnificent piece of furniture in the corner of your bedroom that not only did you cut and saw and nail and sand and varnish and do whatever the hell it took, you physically did the work, Steve, but you had people helping you with placement of hinges and door handles and finishes, and so on and so forth. And then at some point, someone else decides to do exactly the same thing as you, and they can go and look at your log, look what you've done, and end up with the same beautiful looking piece of furniture, perhaps a different color with a different finish, but nevertheless. So in terms of training and recovery, you're doing a bunch of, that's one thing that you're doing. Number two is you're inspiring people. There will be days when you struggled, when you was tired, when work was stressful, when there were family things to sort out, but you managed to get to the gym at 5 in the morning or 10 at night. You're going through divorce. Work is 2 shifts instead of 1 shift, all that kind of stuff. And yet people can click on day one of your log and see that you was out of shape and you wanted to get into shape, and then they go 50 days later, 6-pack, 50 days later on the beach with a tan, looking amazing. And they go, if that's what Joe did in 50 days, then I can do what Joe did in 50 days. I can contact Joe and ask Joe what he did. How did you get through these bad days? How was you able to cope with the stress? And it might be things like recovery. It might be stuff like tweaking the dosage. It might be that they started at one dose and had to take it up, Steve, or they started high and had to take it low, but they still ended up with great results. They had no injuries. They warmed up, they stretched, they did whatever. You will motivate, you will inspire, and as Steve says, you will learn, especially if you've never run a log before. Let me give you an example, Steve, just from one of the logs I'm looking at right now. This is by a member on IronOverload called Vic Liod. I hope I've said that correctly. What do you think about doing some Ostarine, MK2866, and GW in this example, Steve? For lean muscle gains and losing fat. 24 years of age, 167 pounds and 5'6". Trains 4 times a week, but might increase the amount of times of training. With this stack, will this stack, I've just read it as written, will this stack work really good for 12 weeks, or should I try something else and add a third SARM? And one of the things that's worth mentioning with Ostarine, Steve, is not just recovery, it's also a mild, I will say mild, and he does actually ask for lean muscle gains. It's a mild muscle builder as well as the recovery. So a bunch of people came in, give him some suggestions on the dosage in Steve, source products, etc., etc. And obviously, I would say, Steve, looking at the question as is, I would probably leave that stack, not add anything to it until he gets into the program, into the 12 weeks. The guys are giving him some dosages. We've obviously just talked about dosages as well. The GW would be 20 milligrams, the MK2866, the Ostarine, 25 milligrams. 12 weeks sounds fine. And obviously, as that journey took place, as he got into the training program, we would see how he responded and, again, make adjustments, see if he's gaining muscle quick enough, see if he's losing fat quick enough, and make some adjustments again in terms of dosaging, perhaps cardio, and perhaps whether or not, as he says at the end of that particular one, whether he needed to add a third SARM. Let me give you another example, because I've got a few open here, Steve. This particular one was by TOAMB, and again, SR9009, Ostarine MK2866 for 15 weeks in this example, 23 years of age, 5'11", that's up with it in terms of the average height, 218 pounds, so a little bit heavier, and 28, he says 23 years of age, and then at the end he says 28 years of age. I'm going to say 28 years. What are the best things to use with SR9009 and Ostarine if I want to put together a nice lean bulk? Notice how this is actually the same as the last one, Steve. These guys are not looking to throw on 10, 15, 20 pounds. They're looking to put on 5, 6, 7 pounds. And I think Ostarine especially is great. I would argue, Steve, in terms of anabolics, this would be similar for recovery and muscle gaining, but without the side effects, to use an anavar. He goes on. Also, again, losing some body fat, so getting a lean muscle bulk, looking a little bit more in shape before, but a tiny bit bigger. I'm training 5 times a week, and recovery is not easy as I'm going to be using very high volume. That's quite common. Example, for example, it says here, example, yesterday's workout, I put in 25 to 26 sets. That's kind of typical for the high volume approach. I actually think, again, and specifically with the Ostarine here again, Steve, that slightly higher volumes up there with professional athletes. And again, looking for the same kind of response that the other member was asking for, lean muscular bulk. So in other words, what we call a lean bulk now, 5 pounds of tissue, but hard muscular tissue. I would probably, if it was 5 pounds, I'd be looking for maybe 4 pounds of muscle with maybe a pound of water, a pound of fat. And you will, and again, just to give you an example, guys, 5 pounds of tissue on the average height all over your body is roughly half an inch. Now, you wouldn't think that would make much of a difference, but if you trim down that waist, half an inch all over is actually kind of noticeable, especially on the shoulders and arms, Steve. So what do you think about those two cycles?
So give spell the name for us on both of those and the title of the log, so those listening who don't have access to the show notes.
We'll include that obviously in the show notes, but this is SR9009 plus Ostarine MK2866 for 15 weeks is the title, and the member name is TIOAMB. So look for that one, guys. Now we'll give you the other one again, and that is using Ostarine plus GW for lean gains, ? That's the title. And VIPLEOD, VIPLEOD is the member name for the people who want to look. I can give you one more. So let's just finish off this particular one. This is called Going with a Power Stack of SARMs. That's the topic title. And let me see if I will spell this. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in case I get it wrong. GUJIIEO. It sounds a little bit Mexican in the way it's pronounced, etc. Gugio, perhaps. And he says, I'm currently 28 years of age, 5'11" and 218 pounds, similar to the last one. My goal is to get stronger, but I don't want any side effects. This is, again, I would actually argue, Steve, both these cycles so far, and including the one that's about to follow, have been relatively low side effects, if anything. So it's going to put together a nice power stack when it comes to my next SARMs run. 8 weeks. This is fine. RAD 140, he talks about 10 milligrams a day. S4, 50 milligrams a day. Ostarine at 20 milligrams a day. And again, we probably want that to be 25. He says, anything else you would add here? Again, low side effects. Wants to get a little bit stronger in this particular case. So perhaps that's the reason for the S4 and the RAD. Ostarine is dosed a little bit low. And what I see sometimes, Stephen, this is important for the listeners, when it comes to SARMs, the information, let me emphasize this particular point, and I'll bring Steve back in for this. When it comes to SARMs, we see dosages, and Steve actually mentioned one at the beginning of the show, where originally what was effective or proved most effective in the studies, which might have been for medical reasons, and the initial use by athletes, listeners to this show, etc., is relatively low. I think you said, Steve, 25 milligrams, but we've seen people go up to 75 milligrams. What I quite often recommend, and I'll bring Stephen back in for this, is start with what we believe the effective dosage for 99% of you listening to this show. So, for example, GW. I see people talk about 25, 30, 40, 50 milligrams a day, but we know that most users of GW will get great results if they put the hard work in, if their diet, etc., is on point, with 20 milligrams a day. So, for example, Ostarine here, Steve, we know that 25 milligrams is a great starting point. We do also suggest a certain amount of flexibility. If you're getting great results, but you'd like a little bit more, then you could push it a little bit more. Talk about that flexibility of the dosage, Steve, but again, with the effective dose being what it is for most people.
Yeah, and then
Again,
yeah, and it's just like with anabolic steroids, there's a therapeutic dose and there's a PED dose. So if you're going to use a therapeutic dose of Ostarine, you're really not going to get anything because you got to think about it. You're an athlete. You're above and beyond the call of duty. You're going in there and you're absolutely tearing it up.
Sorry, Steve, perhaps the difference between recovery/injury recovery and or muscle growth. So the lower dose,
Yeah.
might be the recovery, and the higher dose will be the slightly more anabolic response.
Yeah, and then with the Ostarine, you could play around. You could do anywhere from 12 and a half milligrams up to 50 milligrams, and maybe the 50 milligrams for like a couple weeks initially might be something to try. And then you can drop it down to 25 milligrams. Economic factors also play a role. You might have an economic reason where you can cut the dose in half and have it last twice as longer. And that would be another option as well. So there's different ways to go about this. The main issue though is TB500 is not cheap. And what happens is a lot of people they'll run the TB500 and they'll run it too low because it's expensive. So, but we have a lot of information, guys, on the forum. So come on the forum, get your log going if you want to try these two out. You come on the forum, IronOverload. Also find out where to buy these products. So, Mobster, take us to the disclaimer.
Great show, guys, and we want to hear your thoughts. And have you done recovery logs? Looking to use these two products? Let us know. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions ours is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast is for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.